Here's a fact that will make you question everything you learned in school. Medieval people never stopped believing the Earth was flat, because they never believed it in the first place. That's not a typo. That's not a hot take. That's what historians of science have been screaming into the void for over 70 years, and almost nobody is listening. The idea that medieval monks and peasants walked around thinking they'd fall off the edge of the world if they went too far, that is one of the most successful lies in modern education. And the story of where that lie came from is stranger than anything you were taught in history class. In this video, we're going to do three things. First, we'll look at what medieval people actually believed about Earth's shape. And the evidence is genuinely jaw-dropping. Then we'll trace exactly who invented the flat Earth myth, when, and why. And finally, we'll answer the real question hiding inside all of this, the one your teachers never thought to ask. Let's start with the thing that will probably bother you the most. You almost certainly know the story of Columbus. He wants to sail west to reach Asia. He stands before a panel of scholars at Salamanca in Spain. They mock him. They tell him the Earth is flat, that he'll sail off the edge. Columbus, brave and enlightened, proves them wrong. It's a great story. Washington Irving wrote it. Yes, that Washington Irving, the man who gave you Rip Van Winkle and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He published his fictional biography of Columbus in 1828, and somewhere inside it, he invented that dramatic Salamanca scene wholesale. The ignorant clerics, the flat earth objections, all of it. A modern historian of Columbus called Irving's version pure moonshine and mischievous nonsense. The scene never happened, and here's the part that really stings. The scholars at Salamanca who actually did push back against Columbus weren't wrong about the shape of the Earth. They were wrong about something else entirely. They thought Asia was much farther west than Columbus claimed. And they were completely right. Columbus had catastrophically underestimated the distance. He only survived because an entire continent he didn't know existed happened to be in the way. His critics were the ones doing the correct math. History just forgot to mention that. So if Columbus's critics knew Earth was round, what exactly did medieval people believe? Here's where it gets genuinely extraordinary. Around 723 AD, that's over 1,300 years ago, an English monk named Bede was teaching his students that Earth must be round. His proof was elegant and simple. Daylight hours change throughout the year. They change differently depending on where you are. The only shape that explains both of those facts simultaneously is a sphere. Bede called our planet the orb of the world. This was standard classroom material. Not radical, not controversial, standard. But that's just one monk. Here's the scale of it. Around 1230 AD, a scholar named Sacrobosco wrote a textbook called De Sphæra Mundi on the sphere of the world. It was the standard astronomy textbook at every major European university. It was reprinted in at least 84 editions over 2 centuries. It was used in universities for over 400 years. Its very first chapter proves Earth is a sphere using 5 separate arguments. One of them is the ship's mast observation. If you watch a ship sail away, the hull disappears before the mast does. The only explanation is that the ocean's surface curves. Sacrobosco even included an illustration of a sailor at the top of a mast spotting land before a sailor on deck could see it. He wrote, and I'm quoting directly here, "There is no other explanation of this thing than the bulge of water." Medieval university students were literally sitting in lecture halls looking at diagrams of a round Earth for 4 centuries. But here's the detail that stops me cold every time I think about it. Every king, every emperor, every pope in medieval Europe held a specific object during their coronation ceremonies. It was called the globus cruciger, a golden orb with a cross on top. It represented their authority over the Earth. That orb was a tiny model of the spherical planet. Every royal coronation from the 5th century onward involved a monarch literally holding a globe. It was the most visible symbol of power in the entire medieval world. If medieval people believed the Earth was flat, someone forgot to tell the kings. And in medieval art, depictions of God the Creator frequently show him holding a compass, the drafting tool you use to draw circles and spheres, because medieval artists understood that God had crafted a spherical world. This wasn't hidden. It wasn't underground knowledge reserved for scholars. It was painted on church walls. Now, at this point you might be thinking, okay, but surely some medieval people believed it was flat. And the answer is technically yes. Historians have found exactly 5 indisputable flat earthers across the entire Middle Ages. 5. Out of a civilization that lasted 1,000 years. And at least 2 of those 5 were mocked by their own contemporaries for being ridiculous. The most famous medieval flat earther was a 6th century monk named Cosmas Indicopleustes. He believed the universe was shaped like Moses' tabernacle, a rectangular box with a curved lid. He thought Earth was a flat oblong table, exactly 12,000 miles long and 6,000 miles wide, surrounded by ocean, with the Garden of Eden somewhere beyond that. It is a genuinely fascinating piece of ancient cosmological weirdness. There's just one problem with using Cosmas as evidence of medieval flat Earth belief. His book was written in Greek. Medieval Western Europe had almost entirely forgotten Greek. His work wasn't translated and revealed to the Western world until 1706. By that point, the Middle Ages had been over for more than 2 centuries. The supposed flagship of medieval flat earthism was completely unknown to medieval people. He only became famous after the period he's supposed to represent. So if medieval people knew Earth was round, who decided they didn't, and why? This is where the story gets genuinely dark. The myth didn't spring from nowhere. It was built in layers by specific people for specific reasons. The first layer was laid in the 17th century by Protestant writers looking for ammunition against the Catholic Church. Smearing medieval Catholic scholarship as ignorant and superstitious was useful propaganda. It wasn't true, but it was useful. The second layer came from a French anti-Christian scholar named Antoine-Jean Latron in the early 19th century. He took those Protestant smears, dressed them up in academic language, and pushed them into school textbooks in the 1860s. Children in the US, the UK, and Japan are still being taught this in 2025. But the third layer is the most cynical one. In 1896, Andrew Dickson White, the founder and first president of Cornell University, published a massive book arguing that the history of civilization was essentially a war between science and religion, with religion always playing the villain. He leaned hard on the flat Earth myth as one of his centerpiece examples. Here's the part that almost nobody knows. White wrote that book partly to retaliate against religious critics who had attacked Cornell's secular charter. He was settling a local political score in upstate New York, and in doing so, he helped cement a false historical narrative that would be taught to hundreds of millions of children. Historian Jeffrey Burton Russell has traced the myth's explosive spread to a very specific window, 1870 to 1920. That is exactly the period when Darwinism was being culturally contested. The flat Earth medieval wasn't just a historical error. It was a rhetorical weapon. If you could make Darwin deniers look like the intellectual heirs of people who thought the Earth was flat, you'd already won the argument before it started. The problem is the people being used as props. Medieval scholars, monks, farmers, never actually believed what they were accused of believing. Now, if you're finding this as mind-bending as I did when I first went down this rabbit hole, stay with me, because the next part is where it gets really strange. There was a genuine controversy in the Middle Ages about Earth's shape. But it wasn't about whether Earth was round. It was about what was on the other side of it. Medieval thinkers accepted a round Earth. What they debated was whether humans could live on the opposite hemisphere, what they called the antipodes. The theological problem was specific and actually quite interesting. If there were people living on the other side of the world, those people couldn't be descended from Adam and Eve because the equator was believed to be too hot to cross. That would break Christian theology. So the debate wasn't geometry, it was genealogy. In 748 AD, an Irish missionary named Virgil was accused of heresy, not for teaching a round Earth, but for teaching that people might exist beneath it on the other side. The Pope excommunicated a bishop for believing in a round Earth story that you may have heard. Wrong on every count. Virgil wasn't condemned. He was made Bishop of Salzburg in 767 AD and was eventually canonized as a saint. The Church's problem was never the sphere. It was the people who might live on the other side of it. And that debate was ultimately settled not by theologians, but by medieval travelers who sailed to Sri Lanka, Java, and Sumatra in the 13th century and proved the equator was perfectly crossable. Reality, as it tends to do, won. Here's one more piece of evidence that I think is the most elegant of all. Dante wrote the Inferno around 1308. You probably read it in school, but your teacher may not have pointed out what Dante was actually doing with physics. When Dante and his guide Virgil reach Satan at the very center of the earth, something strange happens. They've been climbing down Satan's body. Then, at the midpoint, gravity flips. They suddenly find themselves climbing up. They emerge on the opposite hemisphere at Mount Purgatory. Dante understood that a spherical Earth has a gravitational center, that down is always toward that center, and that the opposite side of the world exists and can be reached. He was doing proto-geophysics in a poem written 200 years before Columbus sailed. He even included references to different time zones because he understood that day and night happened simultaneously on opposite sides of a round planet. This wasn't radical. This was the literary culture of medieval Europe. And while Europe was doing all of this, the Islamic world was doing something even more impressive. Around 830 AD, Caliph al-Ma'mun commissioned astronomers to remeasure Earth's circumference. They got within 15% of the modern value. They weren't asking whether Earth was round. They were precision engineering its dimensions. Then in the 11th century, a Persian polymath named al-Biruni calculated Earth's radius to within 1% of the modern value, 6,340 kilometers versus the actual 6,371. He did it using a single mountain, an astrolabe, and trigonometry. One person, one location, one measurement. The West didn't match that accuracy until the 16th century. So let's pull back and look at what we actually have here. Medieval monks teaching spherical Earth in classrooms in 723 AD. University textbooks with diagrams of a round Earth used for 400 years. Kings holding globe-shaped symbols at every coronation for 1,000 years. Dante doing gravitational physics in poetry. Islamic scholars measuring Earth's circumference with extraordinary precision. And on the other side of the ledger, 5 flat earthers, 2 of whom were laughed at by their own contemporaries, and one whose book nobody in the West could even read until 1706. The question was never, when did medieval people stop believing the Earth was flat? The real question, the one that should be keeping you up at night, is why modern people cannot stop believing that medieval people believed it. Historians of science have been trying to correct this myth for over 70 years. They've written books, papers, and lectures. They've cited primary sources, they've named names, and the myth is still in school textbooks right now, today, in 2025. That makes the flat Earth medieval possibly the stickiest false historical fact in Western education. The lie survived longer than the civilization it was supposed to describe, which means the real story here isn't about the Middle Ages at all. It's about us. It's about how a false narrative, once it's in the curriculum, becomes almost impossible to remove, because every new generation of teachers learned it from the last one, and nobody stops to ask where it came from. Washington Irving wrote a novel. Antoine Jean Latron put it in textbooks. Andrew Dixon White used it to win a political argument. And somewhere along the line, it became the thing everyone knows about the Middle Ages. If this changed how you think about history or about what you were taught in school, drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know. Did you learn the flat Earth medieval myth? Because I did, and I'd be curious whether your school is still teaching it. Hit subscribe if you want more videos like this, where we go back to the primary sources and find out what actually happened. And if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, watch this video next. Because the history of what people actually believed versus what we're told they believed goes much deeper than one myth about one planet. The Middle Ages weren't dark, they were just mislabeled.